In this video, we're going to talk about classification of carbons, hydrogens, and alkyl halides. Specifically, I'm referring to the primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary classification. Here we have some different types of carbons. You can see a primary carbon here. Primary can be designated by the one with the little degree sign there. A primary carbon is connected to one other carbon. And if you look at all of the examples here, we've got this carbon here is connected just to green carbon. This carbon down here is connected just to blue carbon. And these three carbons up here are just connected to that red carbon there. So each of those are only connected to one other carbon, which makes them primary. A secondary carbon is connected to two other carbons. In this example here, the blue carbon is connected to two other carbons, and this blue carbon here is connected to two other carbons. So those are both secondary carbons. A tertiary carbon is connected to three other carbons. I only have one example of a tertiary carbon in this structure, but you can see this is the tertiary carbon here. It's connected to three other carbons. Our last carbon type is a quaternary carbon. A quaternary carbon is connected to four other carbons. And you can see this red carbon here is connected to four other carbons. Hydrogens are a little bit different. They can only be connected to one other atom. So in the case of the hydrogens, we're looking at whether the carbon they're attached to is primary, secondary, or tertiary. So in our first example here, we have a primary hydrogen. So a primary hydrogen is connected to a primary carbon. And this carbon is primary because it's only connected to one other carbon. A secondary hydrogen then is connected to a secondary carbon. And that's the case here. This blue hydrogen is connected to a carbon that's connected to two other carbons. A tertiary hydrogen then is connected to a tertiary carbon. There's only one tertiary hydrogen in this picture, and you can see the carbon that it's attached to. This is the tertiary carbon right here. It's connected to three other carbons. There are no quaternary hydrogens, of course, because by definition, a quaternary carbon has to be attached to four other carbons, so it can't have any other atoms bonded to it. With alkyl halides, we also have a situation similar to hydrogens. A bromine, for example, can only be attached to one other carbon, so we look at the carbon it's attached to. In our first example here, a primary alkyl halide, this carbon here is a primary carbon. It is primary because it is attached to one other carbon. A secondary alkyl halide is attached to a secondary carbon. This carbon is secondary because it's attached to two other carbons. A tertiary alkyl halide then is connected to a tertiary carbon. And this carbon here is the tertiary carbon connected to three other carbons. This terminology corresponds to all alkyl halides, so you can also use it for fluorine, chlorine, and iodine.